It's Wednesday, January 8th. Welcome to MarketFoolery. I'm Chris Hill. With me in studio, Bill Mann. Good to see you.
How are you, my friend? Happy New Year.
I'm, as you know from the false start we just had, I'm not caffeinated enough. So,
when do you stop saying Happy New Year? I mean, obviously February is too late.
I think you get to pretty soon, like in the next day or two. I think once you get to double digits in January, it's like, okay, we've moved
I felt
on.
Like this was okay since this is my first time on for the new year. So
absolutely,
Happy New Year, everyone.
But next week, don't pull this.
That's right.
We've got two very different announcements from the same company. We have a group of economists to consider, but we're going to start today with housing. Lennar, the number 2 home builder in the U.S., reported fourth quarter results. Profit and revenue both came in higher than expected. Lennar also bumped up their guidance for the number of homes it expects to deliver in 2020. This is a really good way to end the fiscal year.
It's a boomer of a story. They were supposed to report, expected to report about 6.5 billion in revenue, and they came in at about 7 billion, which that's a lot more. I mean, for housing, that's a pretty predictable industry. So for them to come in that much higher, some of it has to do with the fact that, interest rates have remained so low and people are, the housing market has done really well. But Lennar made a great choice a couple years ago, and it's a really interesting study in corporate governance where they kind of leaned into the trend of people renting instead of buying and said, you know what, we're going to go back into low priced and what we used to call starter homes. We're going to make that a core of our business. And not too many other home builders did that, and it's paying off in a huge way.
So shares of Lennar are up about 3% this morning. You look at this strong quarter, bumping up the guidance for 2020. I felt like the stock should have been up a little bit more, but it's had a pretty good run over the past 12 months.
It's had an okay run. I mean, it's trading at a PE of less than 10 even after the run up. And one thing that is definitely true about home builders is that sometimes low PEs are not necessarily a signpost that the stock is undervalued because it's such a cyclical industry. And I don't know that people still trust that interest rates are going to remain low or that inflation is going to remain in check. I think people are still a little bit shell-shocked from what happened a decade ago in this industry. But this is a well-run company, and we in other areas have looked at this trend of low-cost housing and low-priced housing stock as well. We've recommended a company called Legacy Housing, which is a very similar, has a very similar strategy. So, it was a great quarter, and the company's running on all cylinders. But you're right, the stock didn't seem to react in a way that you might expect.
Boeing shares down a bit this morning in the wake of the crash of Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752. Minutes after taking off in Tehran, the 737 crashed, killing all 176 people on board.
It's
obviously,
terrible. Yeah.
A terrible tragedy. From a business standpoint.
A new crisis.
Well, I was going to say, this is not a 737 MAX because they're all grounded. This is an older model, the 737-800. But this, to your point, this is yet another thing for Boeing to have to respond to.
Yeah. So the grounding of the 737 MAX and how Boeing handled that entire situation has cost them about $9 billion in revenue so far. They were selling about $1.5 billion in the 737 MAXs per month, and it cost Dennis Muhlenberg, the former CEO, his job. The 737-800 is a different beast. According to AirSafe, which is an organization that tracks airline safety, so it's a very well-named organization, 737-800 is amongst the world's safest planes. So we don't know, as we're recording this, what has happened with the flight. The Iranian government came out immediately and said that it was an engine malfunction. The Ukrainian embassy in Tehran came out very quickly and said that it was not terrorism, and then they pulled that report. The Ukrainians, the governments of France, Germany, and Netherlands have restricted their planes from flying in Iranian airspace as a result of the crash. So we don't know. It's obviously my first thought goes out to those affected because it's anytime you see something like this, it's gut wrenching. But there are implications for Boeing as well, and their new CEO is going to have to address it.
When you look at Boeing stock, which is close to a 2-year low, I don't know. I feel like there are still so many questions that it's not even something I want to put on my watch list, even though I completely understand that a reasonable outcome for this business and therefore for this stock is that 2020 is the year all of these issues get resolved, the Maxes get back online, orders start bumping up, and in the next 5 years, this is a stock that's up 50 to 70%.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't sound too crass to say that passenger deaths are a part of the business of making airliners. I mean, that's just airplanes do something that is bending the laws of physics, and occasionally physics wins. But given what happened with the 737 MAX, they have billions of dollars of potential liability in suits from passengers, because it does seem like, and I'm not making a legal judgment here, that there's a case to be made that there was malfeasance or misfeasance or something of that nature on the part of Boeing. Boeing is still the one half of a duopoly, and in the long term, I think that I think that the stock is probably a pretty good bargain where it is here, but there are going to be plenty of questions in the near term.
A couple of announcements from Luckin Coffee, based in China. First, Luckin announced a secondary offering of stock, more than 7 million shares. Luckin also announced it is expanding into vending machines to increase its market share in China.
Yeah.
That appears to be the announcement that's driving the stock today, because shares of Luckin are up about 6%.
Luckin is a really, really interesting company. They've come in and having traveled, having spent as much time in China and places where Starbucks has a pretty good footprint, I've always thought that there was room for a company to come in and to price its goods and price its coffee more in line with the with the incomes of of the local market, and that's what Luckin has done. It has grown like wildfire, 7,000 plus outlets, and the outlets aren't the same as like you would consider a Starbucks store. It's anything from a tiny pop-up to a vending machine. They have done things very, very efficiently and very intelligently.
What could a move into vending machines do for their revenue? And I haven't, beyond sort of the broad announcement, I haven't seen numbers regarding like how many machines they're looking at. Like, is this something that could become a nice sort of small addition to the business and could, if it works out, bump up revenue by single digits or 10%?
Yeah. Or
is this the kind of thing that could actually bump up revenue by somewhere in the neighborhood of 25-30%?
Vending machines are a really interesting, it's a very interesting cultural study. I mean, obviously Japan and China are two different cultures in two different markets, but Japan especially, Korea is the same, really throughout Asia. You see a much higher density and a much higher credibility of vending machines than you do in the United States. You can buy most anything out of a vending machine throughout Asia. China is a little bit behind that curve, but it's certainly there is a lot of hope that they will respond to those types of delivery and commerce markets as well through the form of vending machines. So I don't know the answer there, but Luckin, a lot of Luckin's pop-ups almost are, it's almost like they're already vending machine plus a guy, right? So they're pretty simple and pretty cheap to stand up. So I think that they're simply taking another step towards automation. So it'll be interesting to see.
Before we get to the economists, you were just in Australia with your family.
Yeah.
How was the trip? Other than certainly you all made it back alive, which is great, because right before we started recording, you showed me a picture from one of the beaches you were at where the warning signs included essentially watch out for crocodiles.
Saltwater crocodiles.
Yeah, which I didn't know that was a thing. That's I for whatever reason that escaped my knowledge. That crocodiles come in two forms: freshwater and saltwater. And which really, if you think about it, that's all the water.
That's right. Yeah. Australia's wildlife's reputation, for being willing to kill you in a second. Really, a lot of people think of sharks being in the water in Australia and that being a big issue.
And they are.
They're not the super scary things. It's really the saltwater crocodiles, which just have been known to explode out of the water and grab people on beaches. And that, to me, that's terrifying. So the entire time that we were there, I kept a healthy distance from the beach. I understand probabilities. I just am not really that interested in dying in that way.
Say what you want about sharks. They tend to stay in the water. They don't come up.
They are mostly in the water. They don't jump up on shore as often as you might think. Australia was fantastic. We were there during the backdrop of enormous
horrific fires.
Horrific. I will say that I say this a little bit gently because I don't want to minimize what's happening there. But Australia is the size of the United States, and the area that's being affected by the fires is a tiny percentage of the country. The entire country isn't on fire now because it's such a big country. The percentage, a small percentage, is still a huge amount of land, and it is a tragedy, and it's very sad. And I've been looking for ways to contribute to help, but we didn't see that much from the fires when we were there.
So you pointed out something yesterday. Ben Castleman, who some listeners may be familiar with, a business writer for the New York Times,
fantastic writer,
Ben had tweeted something out about sort of how animals, when you're talking about a group of animals, there's usually a colorful word.
What they call the collective noun.
The collective noun. Yeah. So a school of fish. And so Ben Castleman tweeted, fill in the blank, a pod of whales, a murder of crows, a blank of economists. And I don't know what response he was expecting, but it was certainly bigger.
He got 2,000 responses, and some of them were unbelievable. And I have to say, I am completely fascinated and have always been by the collective nouns. Like, for example, I love the fact that a collection of lobsters is called a risk of lobsters.
Those claws. You got to watch out for them claws.
So some of the answers that he got were fantastic. So he got an academic conference of economists, a bubble of economists, a disagreement of economists, which is dark.
A confusion of economists.
What do you got?
So I liked. I think if I were voting, I would have voted for a bubble. Just because that just seems to fit. But the overwhelming, and I'm sorry for anyone who's listening who actually is an economist, because unfortunately the winner by a pretty wide margin in the voting was a dismal.
A dismal of economists, which since it's called the dismal science makes. Yeah, it makes some sense. That wasn't my favorite. According to James Lipton, who's the guy who wrote a beautiful book called An Exaltation of Larks, the real answer is a recession of economists.
Nice. I don't think the hole I went down this morning on collective nouns was as deep as the hole you went down, but I did learn that. There are different designations for different fish because a school of fish. I think most of us heard that when we were growing up.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that when it comes to rainbow fish, the collective noun is a party, a party of rainbow fish, and that feels right to me.
You know what sharks are?
No.
A shiver of sharks.
A congregation of alligators?
That's right. A parliament of owls. We could be here all day, my friends.
We're not going to be there. We're going to give people back their time. Bill Mann, always good talking to you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Chris.
As always, people on the program may have interest in the stocks they talk about on the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against, so don't buy or sell stocks based solely on what you hear. That's going to do it for this edition of Market Foolery. The show is mixed by Dan Boyd. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.